My name is Britta Osgood and I'm 31. The officiant asked if anyone wanted to speak, and the room was quiet, and I folded the marriage certificate and put it in my bag. There were 11 people at the ceremony. Callum's parents had driven up from Tacoma the night before and were sitting in the front row of folding chairs the venue had arranged in a loose semicircle near the tall windows. His sister Fiona was there and 2 colleagues from his firm, and my closest friend Marin, who had taken the 7:10 a.m. ferry over from Bainbridge Island that morning and arrived at the venue with wet shoes and a bottle of champagne she had wrapped in a dish towel to keep warm. My parents were not there. My sister was not there. The venue was a small event room on the 2nd floor of a building near the Port Townsend waterfront, rented by the hour. The windows faced the bay. It had been raining since well before dawn, a steady coastal rain that had darkened the wood of the dock pilings and turned the water in the bay the color of old pewter. The hills across the strait were buried in cloud cover. The room smelled faintly of wood smoke from the gas fireplace the building manager had switched on for us that morning, and faintly of the cedar oil someone had used on the floors recently, and faintly of the flowers Marin had brought and arranged in 2 glass jars on the windowsill. The officiant was a woman named Sandra who had performed ceremonies like this 40 or 50 times by her own count and had a calm, methodical manner that I found genuinely comforting. She did not add ceremony where none was needed. She did not linger. The whole thing took 22 minutes. Callum held my hand through the readings and through the vows and through the signing. When it was finished his mother hugged me first, a real hug, both arms, and said she was so glad. His father shook my hand with both of his and looked me in the eye and said welcome to the family in a way that sounded like he meant it. Marin opened the champagne before Sandra had finished putting her papers away and it foamed across her hands and onto the hardwood floor and she laughed and said she'd mop it up with her scarf if she had to. She didn't mop it up. Nobody minded. I kept my voice even through all of it. I smiled. I drank the champagne and refilled my glass and drank some more. I was present for every moment of it. I made sure of that. My phone had 2 missed calls from my mother and a text from my father that said, "We're so sorry we couldn't be there. We love you both. Congratulations." My sister had not sent anything. I put the phone back in my bag, next to the certificate. I did not look at it again until that evening. At 1:14 p.m. we walked to a restaurant 3 blocks down the waterfront for lunch, all 11 of us, coats on, walking fast through the rain that had softened to a mist. I sat next to Callum and across from his father and ate grilled salmon with roasted potatoes and drank a glass of white wine and listened to Callum's father tell a long story about a sailing trip to the San Juan Islands he had taken in the early 90s that involved a broken keel pin, a Canadian Coast Guard vessel, and a case of emergency flares that turned out to have expired in 1987. It ended without anyone being seriously harmed and with enough absurdity that it had become, over the decades, one of the family's reliable stories. I laughed at the right moments. I asked follow-up questions. I was there. That evening, after Callum had fallen asleep in the hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the window. The rain had stopped sometime during dinner. The harbor lights were reflected in the dark water below, their shapes long and wavy, moving slightly in the current. I sat there for a long time. I thought about the phone call I had had with my mother 6 weeks earlier, when I had told her the date. She had been quiet for a moment on her end of the line. Then she said, "That's the same weekend as Petra's recital." I said I knew. She said, "We'll have to see what we can manage." She used the tone she kept for decisions she had already made, calm, considering, as though the outcome were still open. I had known, sitting on my kitchen floor with the phone against my ear, that they would not come. She had simply not confirmed it until there was no longer anything to manage. In the morning I called her back. She said again that she was sorry. She said the recital had been beautiful. She said Petra had played the Dvorak and brought the whole room to silence at the end. She said we should have dinner soon, all of us, when things settled. I said I would think about it. I meant something different by that than she understood. I grew up in Port Angeles. My father spent 30 years working for the county in the Public Works Department, managing road maintenance and drainage infrastructure for the Northern Peninsula districts. He retired 4 years ago with a small pension and a handshake from a county commissioner he had worked alongside for 20 of those years. My mother taught 2nd and 3rd grade at an elementary school on the east side of town for 26 years. She retired 2 years after my father. They still live in the house I grew up in, a two-story on a quiet street with a partial view of the strait on clear days and a rose garden along the south fence that my mother has kept and expanded for 30 years. My sister Petra is 24. She is the younger by 7 years. She has played the cello since she was 6 years old, seriously and with dedication, in the way that some people are handed a thing early and grow into it completely. She is genuinely talented. I have believed that since I was old enough to understand what I was hearing when she played, and I have never said otherwise. She completed her undergraduate music degree at the University of Washington and is currently in a postgraduate performance program at a conservatory in Seattle. She performs with a chamber ensemble that gives public recitals several times a year. My parents attend every one. This is not unusual. What is relevant is the pattern of what happens when Petra's schedule and something else occupy the same weekend. What is relevant is that the answer is always Petra. I work as a hydrologist. I have a master's degree from Oregon State University and a professional certification from the American Institute of Hydrology. My work is watershed assessment and stormwater modeling for county, municipal, and tribal clients across the northern Olympic Peninsula. I spend a significant part of my working hours outdoors, in creek beds and on forested slopes and at culvert crossings and drainage outfalls, in weather that cooperates only intermittently. I write technical reports. I build hydrologic models. I present findings to planning commissions and county boards in rooms where the decision has often been made before I arrive, and my job is to give the accurate technical picture regardless. I have been with the same environmental consulting firm for 5 years, based out of an office in Port Angeles. Before that, I spent 3 years at a state agency in Olympia, doing regulatory review work on stormwater permits. I came back to the peninsula when my grandmother's house became available, which I will explain shortly, and because the consulting work was there, and because I find the specific landscape of the northern peninsula, the dark water, the cloud-heavy winters, the way the mountains appear and disappear, more suited to how I think than anywhere else I have tried to live. Callum is 34. He is a maritime attorney with a practice in Port Townsend. He handles vessel documentation, marine insurance disputes, and admiralty matters for commercial fishing and shipping clients along the Puget Sound and Strait of Juan de Fuca. He grew up in Tacoma in a family that ate dinner together every night without exception and treated disagreement at the table as a form of affection. He is precise, patient, and occasionally very funny in a way that takes people by surprise. I met him at a harbor board meeting in Port Townsend 2.5 years ago, where he was representing a commercial fishing cooperative and I was presenting a watershed impact assessment for a proposed dock expansion. We disagreed on the scope of one section of my assessment. He was right on one point. I was right on the other too. We had coffee afterward to clarify the technical record, then dinner the following week, and married 2 years after that in the room above the bay with 11 people and a bottle of champagne that foamed onto the floor. My parents met Callum on 4 occasions before the wedding. Each meeting was cordial and surface level and careful in the way that meetings are when both parties are being polite before they have decided what they actually think. My mother asked him at the 3rd meeting what his family background was, and he told her straightforwardly, and she nodded and said that was interesting. I do not know precisely what she had imagined. I know she had pictured someone local, someone she could map onto people she already knew. Callum was from Tacoma. His mother read Scandinavian crime novels. These facts were not objectionable, but they were unfamiliar, and my mother received unfamiliar things with a careful warmth that was not the same as acceptance, and which I had learned over many years not to mistake for it. The house is what this story turns on. My grandmother's house. She left it to me, specifically to me, not to my parents or to the family in aggregate, in a handwritten addendum to her will that her attorney had formalized and that she had signed 3 weeks before she died. She told my mother her intention directly, and my mother had said of course, whatever you want, Mama, and had not raised it again for several years. My grandmother's name was Astrid. She was my father's mother. She had lived in the Craftsman bungalow on a quiet street 2 blocks from the Port Angeles waterfront for 41 years. The house was built in 1931. The original fir floors were intact throughout. The front porch ran the full width of the house and faced west. The workshop in the back had been my grandfather's. He had done woodworking there for 20 years, furniture mostly, practical things, chairs and tables and cabinets for people in the neighborhood who needed them. When he died, the workshop stayed as it was. My grandmother did not change it. When she died and left the house to me, I did not change it either. In the workshop on the right side of the main workbench, my grandfather's plane sat in the same metal tray where he had always kept it. A vintage Stanley No. 4 bench plane, the tote worn smooth at the grip from decades of his hand. He had kept it clean and lightly oiled. I had kept it the same way. I had never used it on a project because it was not mine to use in that way. It was his, and keeping it was the thing I could still do for him. On the shelf above the secondary workbench, behind the row of craft paper project folders my grandfather had labeled in his own handwriting, a narrow wooden box sat pushed to the back. He had made the box himself. The lid fit precisely, wood against wood, no hardware, nothing decorative that wasn't also structural. The house appraised at $480,000 the previous year. I had lived in it for 4 years since I came back to the peninsula. The property taxes were in my name. The homeowner's insurance was in my name. The deed was recorded in my name. The house was mine by every legal and practical standard that exists. My parents had a key. They had held one since I moved in because my grandmother had always given them a key and the habit had transferred without discussion. I had considered asking for it back at various points. I had not done so. My grandmother's house had a particular quality of light in the mornings, especially in summer, when the west-facing windows caught the reflected brightness off the water and the whole front room was filled with it from about 7 a.m. until 9 o'clock. I had noticed this the first week I lived there and had kept noticing it for 4 years without it becoming ordinary. The fir floors held the light differently than any other floor I had been on. They had been waxed and refinished many times over 90 years, and the surface had developed a depth to it, a slight amber warmth, that newer floors did not have. My grandmother had refinished them herself the last time, in the summer I was 14. She had rented the sander, watched one instructional video, and done the job over 3 days. She said it was not complicated if you kept the sander moving and paid attention to the grain direction. She was right. The craftsman bungalow required maintenance of the kind that older houses require, the kind that is specific and recurring and requires you to learn the house over time. In my first winter, the chimney needed pointing where the mortar between the bricks had deteriorated. I hired a mason from Port Angeles who came on a cold Tuesday and pointed it correctly and charged me $630 for the work and the materials. In my second year, the gutters on the east side of the roof pulled loose at a seam from the weight of a November debris load. I climbed the ladder myself with a rivet gun and a tube of gutter sealant and reattached the seam. It took a Saturday afternoon. The summer after that, I replaced the water supply lines to the kitchen sink, which were original galvanized steel and had been showing rust-colored water at the tap on cold mornings. The new copper lines cost $94 in materials and an afternoon of work, and the water ran clear after that. The previous fall I had refinished a section of the fir floor near the entry where foot traffic had worn through to the bare wood. I matched the stain and finish as closely as I could to the surrounding boards. The patch was not invisible if you knew to look for it. It was invisible if you did not. My mother had mentioned once, about 2 years after I moved in, that the workshop would make a charming garden studio if the tools were cleared out and the space was opened up a bit. I told her the tools were staying where they were. She said, of course, just a thought. The subject had not come up again. But I had not forgotten that she had said it. There was a third thing in the workshop besides the tools and the project folders. On the east wall above the door to the yard, my grandfather had mounted a narrow shelf that held 3 items: a tin of linseed oil, a folded piece of canvas he used for resting blades when he sharpened them, and a coffee mug with a broken handle that he had kept there for years, containing the particular pencils he used for marking cuts. He marked cuts in pencil before he made them, every time, regardless of how simple the cut. He said a mark was not slowing you down. A mark was thinking made visible. I had not moved any of the 3 items on the shelf. The mug with the broken handle was still there. The pencils inside it were his. The wedding was in October. The months that followed were quiet between my parents and me. Not hostile quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in when something has been said clearly enough that neither party needs to say it again. I did not withdraw from function. That is not how I am built. I kept doing what I had always done for my family, in the specific and unremarkable way that care actually operates, not in declarations but in Tuesday mornings and wet soil and long drives and 2 hours at a kitchen table. In November, I drove my father to a cardiology follow-up appointment in Port Angeles because my mother had a dental procedure scheduled for the same morning and could not take him. He was in good spirits. The appointment showed nothing alarming. I took him to a diner on the waterfront afterward and he ordered the halibut sandwich and coffee and told me about a drainage project he had overseen in 1997 that involved a culvert collapse under a county road and a commissioner who had called him at home on a Saturday to explain, at considerable volume, what he expected to happen by Monday. My father had fixed it by Monday. I refilled his coffee twice from the carafe on the table. I drove him home in the light rain that had started while we were inside and carried his jacket in from the car because he had left it on the back seat. I helped my mother prepare the rose garden for winter in late October, the weekend after the wedding. Her hands had been troubling her and the roses needed cutting back and mulching before the first hard frost settled in. I spent a Saturday morning doing it, just under 4 hours, on my knees in the cold wet soil with her pruning notes written on an index card I kept in my jacket pocket. I cut back 16 bushes in the beds along the south fence. I laid bark mulch along the bed edges in a layer thick enough to hold through January. I filled 4 paper yard bags with the clippings and carried them to the curb. My hands were stiff and cold for the rest of that day and into the evening. I had paid for my grandmother's headstone when she died. I was 17. I used money from a summer job I had held since I was 15 and from a small savings account I had been adding to since I was 12. My parents offered to cover the cost and I said I wanted to do it. The headstone cost $420. My grandfather's name was already engraved on the stone. I paid to have my grandmother's name and the dates of her life added in the same typeface below his. I visit the grave twice a year, in April and in October, and bring wildflowers from the yard of the craftsman house, from the bed along the back fence that she planted herself. I had driven Petra to Seattle twice the previous year when her car was out of service. The first trip was a Tuesday in February. I left Port Angeles at 6:48 a.m. and arrived back home at 7:22 p.m., 3 hours each way with a stop for gas and a bad cup of coffee at a station outside Sequim. Petra slept most of the way there and talked about her program most of the way back. I listened. The second trip was a weekend in April, the car still waiting on a backordered part. I drove her up on Friday and came back Sunday after helping her carry a borrowed keyboard stand up 3 flights of stairs in an apartment building with no elevator. My lower back was sore for 2 days. The previous summer I had spent a weekend helping my parents repaint the interior of their house. My father's back had been difficult that year and my mother had started the project herself and reached the point where she could not finish it alone without it taking weeks she didn't have. I took a Friday off from work and drove to their house at 7:31 a.m. I painted the upstairs hallway, the guest bedroom and the bathroom over 2.5 days. I bought the primer and finish coat myself at the hardware store because I was already there and it was simpler, 2 gallons of primer and 3 of finish coat, $212. My mother had chosen the color from a swatch she had been holding onto for a year. When it was on the walls she stood in the hallway and said it looked better than she had expected. I had lent my parents $1,100 in the spring of the previous year when an unexpected tax assessment came in and their account was temporarily short. My father said he would repay it within the month. He transferred $700 6 weeks later. The remaining $400 had not been mentioned since by either of them. I had not raised it. I had brought meals to their house on 4 separate occasions when my mother was recovering from a minor procedure. Soup, bread, things requiring no preparation from her, left in sealed containers on the front porch when she said she was too tired for a visit. Each time she texted afterward, "You didn't have to." I did not reply to those texts because there was nothing that needed to be said in response. I had sat with my father at his kitchen table for 2 hours in March when he was having a difficult few weeks about the finances and the future and what things would look like in 10 years. He hadn't asked for advice. He had asked to talk through it with someone who would listen without telling him what to do. I listened. I asked questions when they seemed useful. I did not tell him what I thought he should do. When I left he walked me to the door and held my shoulder for a moment and said I was a good kid, which was something he had not said in a long time, and which I did not know what to do with, so I just nodded and got in the car. None of it was remarkable. It was the ordinary ongoing work of being someone's daughter and someone's sister, done without announcement or accounting, in the way that actual care works, quietly, repeatedly, in the particular weather of each specific day. There was one more thing I had done that I had not included in the list I gave my mother that morning, because it was the kind of thing that felt wrong to include. When my grandmother was in her last months, I drove to Port Angeles on 7 separate occasions to sit with her, sometimes for an afternoon, once for 2 days when my parents were traveling and she had been clear that she did not want to go to a care facility. I drove from Olympia on those days before I had moved back to the peninsula, a 4-hour round trip after a full day of regulatory work. We sat in the kitchen and she told me things about the house, about the workshop, about my grandfather, about what she had intended when she made certain decisions. She told me that she had watched how I moved through the world, carefully, with attention to what actually was rather than what I had assumed, and that this was why she was giving me the house. Not proximity. Not convenience. She said she wanted the house to go to someone who would keep it as it was, learn its particular requirements, and not need the house to be something other than what it was. I had not told my parents this. There was nothing they could do with it and it was not for them. My parents had not come to my wedding. My sister had not texted. 8 months later, on a Thursday morning, my father sent me a text at 8:09 a.m. that said, "We should reconnect. It's about the house." I was standing in my kitchen in my work clothes from the previous day's site visit, still in my boots, holding a mug of coffee I had not yet drunk. I read the text. I set the phone face down on the counter. I picked it up and read it again. I set the mug down and looked out the kitchen window. The fir tree in the side yard was moving in the wind. Past its upper branches I could see the roof line of the workshop, the weathered cedar shake my grandfather had installed himself in 1978, still holding after all this time. I thought about the plane on the workbench. In its tray. Clean and oiled and exactly where it had always been. I thought about the wooden box on the back shelf, with its precisely fitted lid, sitting where my grandfather had left it. I picked up the phone. I typed, "When?" He replied in 4 minutes, "This weekend if you can. Come to the house." I said Saturday worked. I put the phone in my pocket and finished my coffee standing at the window, watching the fir move in the wind, thinking about what "it's about the house" could possibly mean, and finding that I already knew. I drove to my parents' house on Saturday morning. The weather had been clear overnight and the drive down the east side of town was sharp and cold, the kind of November morning where the strait was visible from the high stretches of road and the water looked almost white in the early light. I left my house at 8:23 a.m. I did not call ahead. My father knew I was coming. I had spent Friday evening at home with Callum. I told him about the text. I told him what I thought it meant. He listened. He asked 2 questions, one about the legal situation regarding the house and one about whether I wanted him to come with me on Saturday, and I answered both. The house was entirely mine, legally, with no ambiguity. And I wanted to go alone. He nodded at both of these things. He did not tell me what he thought I should say or how I should handle it. He said he would be here when I got back and asked if I wanted anything from the farmer's market he was going to in the morning. I said coffee and whatever looked good. He said that was a reasonable answer. I thought about this on the drive down, about the particular quality of Callum's attention, which was different from the attention I had grown up surrounded by. His attention was not interested in changing the outcome. It was interested in the actual situation. He had disagreed with one point in my watershed assessment at the Harbor Board meeting 2.5 years ago because he had read the relevant data more carefully than I had and the data said something I had not fully accounted for. That was all. He was right on that point. He had been right on the same kind of point, in the same quiet, methodical way several times since. I trusted this about him entirely. I parked in front of the house at 8:41 a.m. The rose garden along the south fence was cut back and mulched, exactly as I had left it 6 weeks earlier. The front porch light was on. I sat in the car for a moment and looked at the house. Then I got out and walked to the door and knocked. My father answered. He was dressed, which meant he had been up for a while. He looked like he had slept poorly. He stepped back and let me in without saying much beyond my name. The house smelled like coffee and toast. My mother was in the kitchen. I heard her moving before I saw her. She came to the doorway between the kitchen and the living room and looked at me with an expression that was careful and composed and gave nothing away. "Britta," she said. "Come sit down. I'll get coffee." I followed my father into the living room. He sat in his chair by the window. I sat on the sofa. Through the window behind him I could see the fir tree at the edge of the front yard, its upper branches moving in the light wind. My mother brought 3 mugs and set them on the coffee table. She sat in the other chair across from my father, which put me between them on the sofa. I noted the geometry of it without commenting. I wrapped both hands around the mug and waited. My father looked at my mother. She looked at her coffee. He cleared his throat. We wanted to talk to you about the house, he said. Your grandmother's house. I assumed, I said. My mother looked up. There's been a development, she said. With our situation. Financially. We didn't want to alarm you, but things have been more constrained than we've let on, and we've been doing a lot of thinking about the future. I kept my voice even. What kind of development? Your father's pension adjusted, she said. There was a cost of living recalculation the fund made 2 years ago that reduced the monthly amount. We managed it for a while, but the gap has been compounding. And the house here needs work. The roof is showing its age. The furnace is original to the renovation we did in 2004. These things don't fix themselves. I looked at my father. How much did the pension adjust? He named a figure. It was not a small reduction. I said nothing for a moment. We should have told you sooner, he said. I didn't want to make it your problem. It's not my problem, I said carefully. But I'm glad you're telling me now. What do you need? My mother set her mug down. We've been thinking about the house, she said. Your grandmother's house. About what it represents as an asset and what it could mean for the family's stability going forward. My stomach dropped. I kept my face still. What are you proposing? I said. We're not proposing anything dramatic, she said. She used the word dramatic the way she always did, as a way of preemptively framing any strong reaction I might have as an over-response to something reasonable. We're asking you to think with us about what makes sense. The house is worth nearly $500,000. You're living there alone. You have a good income, a stable career. You and Callum are building something together. And we are in a position where we have equity on paper, in that house, and no way to access it. I looked at her. You don't have equity in that house, I said. It's in my name. It was left to me. It was built by this family, she said. It was maintained by this family for 40 years before you were old enough to do anything with it. Grandma built it, I said. Grandma and Grandpa. And she left it to me. She left it to you because you were available, my mother said. Because you were here and you were the practical choice. That was never meant to be a permanent exclusion of the rest of the family from an asset we all have a relationship with. Grandma wrote it into her will, I said. She told her attorney. She told you directly. She told me she wanted you to have the use of it, my mother said. That's different from intending it to be your permanent private asset while the rest of the family has no claim on it at all. I didn't answer that. My father looked at the window. His jaw was set in the way it got when he was uncomfortable and had committed to staying in the room anyway. We're not asking you to move out, my mother said. I want to be clear about that. We're asking you to consider a shared ownership structure. Something formal, through an attorney, where the house is held as a family asset and we have a stake that we could, if necessary, borrow against. You would still live there. Nothing about your daily life would change. My name is on the deed, I said. Alone. It would require me to sign over a portion of what I own to you. A portion of what the family built, she said. What Grandma built, I said. Her expression shifted slightly, not anger, something more controlled than that. A recalibration. Britta, she said. I want you to hear what I'm saying without framing it as an attack. We are not attacking you. We are telling you that we are struggling and that there is an asset in this family that could help, and we are asking you, as family, to think about whether holding it exclusively is the right thing when other people who love you are in difficulty. I hear what you're saying, I said. Good. And I'm telling you that the house is mine, I said. Legally and completely. What you're describing would require me to voluntarily reduce my ownership of my own property. That's not a family conversation. That's a legal transaction. Everything is legal with you, she said, and now the patience in her voice had something underneath it, something that had been waiting for the right moment. Everything comes down to documents and what's on paper. You've been that way since you were a child. You make a list, you check the boxes, you keep receipts for things that don't need receipts. You approach your own family like they're a county planning commission you need to present data to. I said nothing. We are your parents, she said. We raised you. We made choices for 20 years that cost us things so that you could have opportunities. That doesn't show up on a deed. It doesn't show up in a tax record. But it's real and it matters, and we are asking you to see it. I see it, I said. Do you? Yes, I said. And I've tried to show that I do. I drove Dad to his cardiology appointment in November. I prepared your garden in October. I drove Petra to Seattle twice last year. I painted your house last summer. I lent you $1,100 in the spring that hasn't come back. I've shown up every time you've needed something without being asked and without making it a transaction. That's what I have. I can't give you my house. The room was quiet. My mother looked at me for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Then she looked at my father. The wedding, she said, and the word landed differently than anything else she had said, more quietly, more deliberately. I know you're still angry about the wedding. This isn't about the wedding, I said. I think it is, at least partly, she said. I think you've been keeping score since October, and this is what it looks like when you decide the score justifies saying no to something. I'm not keeping score, I said. I'm telling you that my grandmother left me her house and I'm not signing part of it over to resolve a financial gap that has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you, she said. You are part of this family. What happens to us happens to you. That's what family means. Then what happened to me in October happened to you too, I said. The room went quiet again. My father looked at his coffee mug. We made a difficult choice, my mother said. Petra had worked for 2 years toward that recital. The conservatory performance was a significant milestone for her career. We could not simply not go. You had 11 people there who love you. Callum's family was there. Your friend was there. You were not alone. You weren't there, I said. Britta. I'm not angry, I said. I'm telling you what's true. You weren't there. And that's a choice you made and it belongs to you. But it's also part of the picture when you ask me to give you something significant. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think you've decided to punish us. I've decided not to sign over part of my house, I said. Those aren't the same thing. In your mind perhaps not, she said. But from where I'm sitting, a daughter who was at our table every holiday for 30 years is suddenly telling us that her grandmother's house is hers and hers alone and we have no claim on it, and she's doing it within a year of a wedding we weren't able to attend. I think the connection is real whether you want to name it or not. The connection, I said, is that you're asking me for something large and I'm saying no. We're asking you to be part of this family, she said. I've been part of this family, I said. I've been in it, doing the work of it, for 31 years. Being part of a family doesn't mean giving up property rights. She looked at me. Your grandmother would want this family taken care of, she said. She would want us to work together. She would not want her house to become a wall between us. I don't know what she would want, I said. But I know what she did. She wrote a will. She talked to her attorney. She had a conversation with you directly and told you her intention. I know what she did. My father set his mug down. He had not spoken in some time. He looked like a man who had agreed to be in a room and was now wishing he had thought more carefully about that decision. My mother looked at me steadily. You're going to tell me she wanted you to have it outright, she said. Not as a holding arrangement. That's what she meant. That's what she did, I said. I'm not interpreting it. I'm reading the will. Wills don't capture everything, she said. They capture what the person chose to put in them, I said. She was not confused. She was not being vague. She wrote a specific addendum with an attorney present. She was sick, my mother said. Not unkindly. As a fact. She was precise until the end, I said. You know that. You were there. My mother was quiet for a moment. I know, she said. And then more quietly, I know. My father looked at his hands. She didn't talk to me about it, he said. Before she did it. I found out afterward. I said nothing. I'm not saying it was wrong, he said. I'm saying I didn't know. She knew her own mind, I said. She always did, he said. He said it without bitterness, which was the thing about my father I had always found hard to fully account for, his capacity for accepting things he had not been consulted on, particularly from people he loved. He had been doing it for 30 years with my mother. He had learned it earlier, perhaps, with his own. There's something else, he said. His voice was quieter than my mother's. More tired. I looked at him. The key, he said. We still have the key to the house. Your grandmother's house. I know, I said. We've held on to it because it's always felt like, because the house has always felt like, he stopped. Your mother has been in the house, he said. A few times in the last year. To check on things, she said. To make sure everything was in order while you were away. My throat went tight. I looked at my mother. She met my eyes without looking away. I went in twice, she said. When you were on fieldwork. I wanted to make sure the workshop was secure. The roof on the workshop has been concerning me. You went into my house without telling me, I said. I have a key, she said. You have a key I haven't asked for back, I said. That's not permission. We raised you in that house, she said. We helped your grandmother maintain it for 40 years. I don't think checking on the workshop constitutes a violation. I didn't answer. There were some things in the workshop, she said. Your grandfather's tools. We were talking about whether it made sense to have them assessed. They have value, some of them. If the house were a shared asset, those decisions would be made together. My stomach dropped again, farther this time. The tools stay where they are, I said. I'm not suggesting we do anything with them today, she said. I'm saying that if this were a family asset, these would be family decisions. It's not a family asset, I said. And the tools stay where they are. She looked at me for a long moment. You're very certain about what's yours, she said. Yes, I said. Even when it costs the people who love you. Being certain about what's mine doesn't cost you anything, I said. What costs you is the financial situation you're in, which exists independently of my house and my grandfather's tools. It doesn't feel independent, she said. It feels like you're choosing a document over your family. I'm choosing not to sign a document, I said. There's a difference. My father looked at the window. The light outside had shifted. It was later than I had thought. The workshop, I said. When you went in, did you go into the workshop? My mother's face went still. Did you touch anything on the workbench? I said. I looked around, she said. I didn't disturb anything. Did you touch the plane? I said. The Stanley plane in the tray on the right side. A pause. I may have picked it up, she said. To look at it. I set it back. I'd like the key back, I said. Before I leave today. The room was quiet. My father looked at my mother. She looked at me. All right, she said. Her voice was flat now. The patience had finished. If that's what you want. It is, I said. She stood and went to the kitchen. I heard a drawer open. She came back and set the key on the coffee table between us, on top of a coaster, without sliding it toward me. I picked it up. I stood. I put my coat on. I put the key in my coat pocket. I'll be in touch, I said. I want to think about what you've said and I want to do some things before we talk again. What things? My mother asked. I'll be in touch, I said again. She looked at me. You approach everything like a county planning commission, she said. Even this. You told me that already, I said. And I'm still your daughter. We came to you because you're our daughter, she said. Not because we were trying to take something. I know that, I said. And the house is still mine. I said goodbye to my father. He nodded once. He looked tired and old in a way I had not let myself notice before, and I noticed it now and set it aside and walked to the front door and opened it and stepped outside into the cold morning air. I pulled the door closed behind me. Quietly, all the way to the latch. I walked to the car. I sat in the driver's seat and put both hands on the wheel. The street was empty. The rose garden was bare along the fence. The front porch light was still on. I started the car and drove home. I got home at 9:58 a.m. I changed out of my coat and hung it on the hook by the door. I put the key on the kitchen counter. I looked at it for a moment, the key my grandmother had given my parents, that had transferred without discussion when she died, that had been in a drawer in their kitchen for 4 years while I was living in the house it opened. I was glad to have it back. I was aware that having it back was not the same as the situation being resolved. I went to the workshop. I opened the door and stood in the doorway for a moment while my eyes adjusted. The smell was the same, old wood, linseed oil, the particular cold dusty smell of a space that was kept but not actively used. The light came in through the single window on the north wall, gray and flat. The temperature inside was about the same as outside, maybe a degree or two warmer from the thermal mass of the concrete floor and the wood walls that had been holding ambient temperature for 90 years. I breathed it in. I had stood in this doorway many times and it had never failed to feel like the same room it had always been. I walked to the workbench. I looked at the metal tray on the right side. The plane was in it. It appeared exactly as I had left it. I picked it up and turned it over slowly in my hands, checking the blade, the tote, the chip breaker. Everything was in order. The blade was set correctly, a fine, even shaving gap, just as my grandfather had kept it, just as I had checked and maintained it each time I came in here to do so. It had not been disturbed in any way that I could see. But she had held it. Her hands had been on the tote and the body, on the same wood his hands had worn smooth. I wiped it carefully with the corner of my shirt and set it back in the tray. I looked at the pegboard above the bench, the small strips of tape my grandfather had placed at each tool's outline, so you could see at a glance if something was missing. Every tool was in its place. The chisels, the spokeshave, the marking gauge, the combination square. Everything exactly where he had put it. I went down the row, checking each one. I checked them the same way I checked anything on a site visit, methodically from one end to the other, not skipping ahead, not assuming the middle was fine because the ends looked right. Everything was where it should be. I stood in the workshop for a long moment. Then I went to the shelf above the secondary workbench on the left wall, where my grandfather had kept his project folders, craft paper folders, each one labeled in his handwriting with the name of a piece of furniture he had built or planned to build. Behind the folders, pushed to the back of the shelf, was the narrow wooden box I had noticed the first week I moved into the house. My grandfather had made it himself. The lid fit precisely, no hardware, just the wood joining itself cleanly. I had looked inside the box once when I first moved in. Inside it was a single folded document, the original deed to the property, the one from when my grandparents had bought the lot and built the house, with both their names on it. My grandfather's name and my grandmother's name side by side. My grandmother had kept it in his workshop because she said it belonged to the place it described, not in a filing cabinet somewhere. I had read every word of it that first night, and then put it back and left it where she had kept it. A document that was recorded at the county was still the same document for having a copy in a wooden box on a workshop shelf. But it was also something else. It was the version she had wanted kept close to the house itself. I had understood that without being told and had honored it without thinking about it again until this morning. I reached up and took the box down from the shelf. I held it for a moment. The wood was smooth and cool under my hands, the grain running precisely along the length of it, the lid fitting with the quiet exactness of something made to last. My grandfather had built things the same way he maintained them, nothing decorative that wasn't also structural, nothing loose that could be tightened. The box was about the length of a ruler and maybe 3 inches deep, with no label, no latch, no ornamentation of any kind. It was exactly what it needed to be to hold one folded document safely. Nothing more. I carried it to the kitchen table and set it down. I stood and looked at it for a long time without touching it again. Then I picked up my phone and called my mother. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was careful, the way it had been all morning, composed and waiting. "I need you and Dad to come to the house," I said. "My house. This afternoon." A pause. "Today?" "Yes," I said. "There's something I want to show you." Another pause. "All right," she said. "What time?" 2 o'clock, I said. She said they would be there. She did not ask what I wanted to show them. I thought she probably already had a version of it worked out in her mind, a version where whatever I was about to do confirmed something she had already decided about me. I let that go. I spent the time between the call and 2 o'clock doing ordinary things and thinking, and doing the two simultaneously the way I had learned to do on long site drives and long fieldwork mornings, letting the thoughts move through without interrupting what my hands were doing. I made a second cup of coffee. I drank it standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the fir tree in the side yard, at the workshop beyond it. The workshop door was closed. The cedar shake roof had held through 3 more winters since my grandfather had installed it in 1978. It would need replacing eventually. When it did, I would hire a crew and watch them work and learn what I could from watching, and then I would know how the workshop roof had been built and could describe it precisely if I ever had to. This was how I knew most things about the house, by being present when the work was being done, by asking the people doing it the right questions, by keeping the invoices in the folder in the filing cabinet in the back bedroom where I kept all the house documents. I went back to the workshop and stood at the bench for a long time without touching anything. I looked at the plane in its tray. I looked at the row of chisels on the pegboard above the bench, each one in its place. I looked at the shelf above the secondary workbench, now empty where the wooden box had sat for 41 years. The rectangle of slightly darker shelf where the box had rested was visible. The wood behind it had been protected from the light, from the air, from the gradual oxidation that had aged everything around it. The box shape was still there on the shelf, in negative, like the outline my grandfather had taped for each of his tools. I thought about my mother sitting in my living room this morning, composed, careful, in the armchair across from the sofa she had placed me on, and I thought about how long she had been holding the shape of this conversation in her mind. How many versions of it she had run through before my father sent the text. How certain she had been, arriving, that the version she had prepared would hold. It had not held. Not because I had been strategic, I had not planned the wooden box until I was standing in the workshop at 9:58 in the morning and understanding for the first time what I was going to have to show her, but because the thing she was trying to make true was simply not true, and things that are not true do not hold up when someone is willing to keep saying so. I did not feel satisfied by this. I felt the particular flatness that comes after a necessary conversation, the kind where you have been right about everything and it has cost something anyway. I went back inside. I put the wooden box in the center of the kitchen table. I sat and waited. They arrived at 2:07 p.m. I heard my father's car in the driveway. I heard their footsteps on the porch. I opened the door before they knocked. My mother came in first. She looked at the kitchen table. She saw the box. Her face went still. My father followed. He looked at the box and then at me and then sat down at the table without being asked, the way he always did in this kitchen, in the chair nearest the window that had been his chair since my grandmother was alive. My mother sat across from him. I sat at the end of the table between them with the box in front of me. No one said anything for a moment. "I want to show you something," I said. I reached for the box. I slid it to the center of the table so they could both see it clearly. I lifted the lid. The lid came away cleanly, the same precise fit it had always had, wood against wood with no play in it. I took out the document and unfolded it along its crease lines, carefully, one fold at a time, and laid it flat on the table between them. My father leaned forward. He looked at the document for a long moment. His jaw tightened. "That's the original deed," he said. "Yes," I said. My mother looked at it. She did not reach for it. "I know what that is," she said. Her voice was even. "I know you do," I said. "I want to talk about what it means." "It means they bought the house in 1953, she said. "I'm aware of the history." "It means they bought it together," I said. "Both names on it. Both of them. And when Grandpa died, it passed to Grandma. And when Grandma died, she made a specific, deliberate, legally documented decision about where it would go next. She didn't leave it to the family. She left it to me. By name. With a signed addendum and an attorney present." My mother looked at the document. "We've been over this," she said. "This morning you told me she left it to me as a convenience," I said. "Because I was available. Because I was the practical choice." She didn't answer. "She signed a legal document 3 weeks before she died," I said. "She talked to her attorney." "She talked to you." She was not confused and she was not being casual. She was being exactly as precise as she was about everything else in her life. "Britta, this morning you said that holding the house exclusively while other family members are in difficulty was not the right thing," I said. "Those were your words." She looked at me. "I stand by that." "And you said that whatever Grandma would want, it would be for this family to work together," I said. "That she would not want the house to become a wall between us." "I believe that," she said. "She left it to me," I said. "That was her decision about what working together looked like. That was her intention. Not a convenience. Not a placeholder. A decision." My mother was quiet. "You went into my house without asking me," I said. "Twice that you've told me about. You went into the workshop. You handled things on the workbench without asking me." "I told you." "You told me you wanted to check on the workshop roof," I said. "And then you told me you'd picked up the plane to look at it. And then you told me that if this were a family asset, decisions about Grandpa's tools would be made together." She didn't answer. "I'm telling you it's not a family asset," I said. "And the tools are not a family decision." "We're not trying to take the tools," she said. "I know what you're trying to do," I said. "You're trying to establish that you have a legitimate relationship with this house that supersedes what's on the deed. You've been doing it since I moved in. The key. The visits. The comments about the workshop. The suggestion about clearing out the tools. This morning's conversation. It's been a series of steps, each one small enough to seem reasonable on its own. Her face went still. We are struggling, she said. Her voice had dropped. The composure was intact, but something underneath it had shifted. That is real. That is not a strategy. We are genuinely struggling, and we came to you because you are our daughter and we thought you would want to help. I do want to help, I said. I've been helping for years. The appointments. The garden. The painting. The money I lent you. The drives. All of it. That's different, she said. It's the same thing, I said. It's me showing up for this family in the ways I can. What I can't do is sign part of my house over to you. That's not a boundary I'm drawing because I'm angry about the wedding or because I'm keeping score. It's a boundary that exists because this house is mine and Grandma made it mine on purpose. My father looked at the document on the table. He had not spoken since identifying it. He looked like he was reading it again slowly, though I did not think he was seeing the words. She never talked to me about it, he said. Her decision. She told your mother, but she never talked to me directly. She talked to her attorney, I said. She signed the addendum. That was her conversation. He nodded once, very slowly. I know, he said. I know that. My mother looked at him and then back at me. So that's your answer, she said. It's yours, it's documented, and we have no claim. That's the legal answer, I said. Yes. And the family answer? The family answer is that I love you, I said. And I will keep showing up for you in the ways I can. But I won't sign part of my house over to you, and I won't pretend that what happened at my wedding didn't happen, and I won't act as though coming into my home without asking and handling things on my grandfather's workbench was a reasonable thing to do. She looked at me for a long time. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her. You came to this conversation with that box already planned, she said. I came to this conversation with something I wanted to show you, I said. It amounts to the same thing. I don't think it does, I said. I'm not trying to win an argument. I'm trying to show you what she actually did. So that when you tell me what she would have wanted, you're looking at what she actually chose. My mother looked at the document on the table. She looked at her parents-in-law's signatures side by side in fountain pen on paper that was older than my father. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. My father looked at the document too. He had turned slightly in his chair to face it more directly. His hands were on the table, folded. He looked like he was reading it, though I could see from his eyes that he was not reading the text, he was looking at the signatures. At his father's name, the angular leftward lean of a man who had been taught to hold a pen against his natural inclination, and at his mother's name, small and upright and perfectly clear. She wrote it this way, he said, half to himself. On purpose. Yes, I said. She could have left it jointly. She could have left it to me and let me decide. She didn't, I said. He looked at me. No, he said. She didn't. My mother looked up from the document. Something had shifted behind her eyes, not capitulation, but the first real acknowledgement that the version she had been holding was not the version my grandmother had intended. She talked to me, she said. Before she signed it. She said she wanted you to have it. I told her, of course. I thought, she stopped. What did you think? I said. I thought she meant she wanted you to live there, my mother said. To have the use of it. I didn't understand it as a permanent exclusion. She said specifically to me, I said, that she was leaving me the house because she wanted it to go to someone who would keep it as it was. My mother was quiet. Those were her words, I said. Not a convenience. Not a placeholder. Someone who would keep it as it was. She was a very certain woman, she said finally. Not as a complaint. As something close to recognition. Yes, I said. You're like her, she said. I didn't answer. You've always been like her, she said. She kept receipts too. She kept everything. That box has been on that shelf since before your father was born. I know, I said. My mother looked at my father. He was still looking at the document. She looked back at me. We're not going to resolve the financial situation today, she said. No, I said. But you're not going to help us with the house. Not in the way you've described, I said. No. She nodded once. It was not agreement. It was acknowledgement that the position was real and would not move. This morning I said you approach your family like a county planning commission, she said. I remember, I said. I shouldn't have said that, she said. Her voice was flat, not warm but honest. It was unkind. It was, I said. You've shown up for us, she said. I know you have. I know the list you gave this morning was real. I'm not disputing any of it. I know, I said. But I want you to understand that we came to you today because we're frightened, she said. Not because we were trying to take something from you. Because we're frightened and you're our daughter and we didn't know where else to go. I understand that, I said. And I want to help you find a real solution. Not the house. But a real one. I'll sit down with you and Dad and go through the finances properly and figure out what the actual options are. I'll do that. That's something I can do. My mother looked at me. Something in her face shifted, not relief exactly, but something that had been braced against impact and had found that the impact was not what it expected. All right, she said. But I need the visits to stop, I said. My house is my house. If you want to come, you call first. And the workshop is not a family decision. She looked at the table. All right, she said again. And the wedding, I said. I'm not asking you to undo it. I'm asking you to acknowledge that it happened the way it happened and that it cost something. Her face went still again, a different kind of still. My father looked at the window. We missed your wedding, my mother said. Her voice was quiet. The certainty had gone out of it. And we shouldn't have. Petra's recital mattered. And your wedding mattered more. I've known that since October and I haven't said it. I said nothing. I'm sorry, she said. For not being there. I looked at her. I know, I said. Thank you for saying it. My father looked at the document still lying flat on the table. He reached out and touched the edge of it with 2 fingers, not picking it up, just touching it. She knew what she was doing, he said. Your grandmother. She always did. Yes, I said. He withdrew his hand. I folded the document back along its crease lines and placed it in the box and closed the lid. I stood. My mother stood. My father stood more slowly with the care his back required these days. I walked them to the front door. My mother paused in the doorway and looked back at the kitchen, at the table, at the box sitting in the center of it. It's a good house, she said. It is, I said. She stepped out onto the porch. My father followed. I held the door and watched them walk to the car. My father opened the passenger door for my mother, the way he always had, and she got in, and he went around to the driver's side and got in, and they backed out of the driveway slowly and drove down the quiet street and turned at the corner and were gone. I closed the front door. I stood in the hallway for a moment. The house was quiet. The afternoon light came through the west windows of the living room in long pale rectangles on the floor. I went to the workshop. I stood at the workbench for a long time without doing anything. The plane was in its tray. The chisels were on the pegboard. The tape labels my grandfather had made for each tool were still there, faded at the edges, each one marking the outline of the thing it named. Above the door, the narrow shelf held the tin of linseed oil and the canvas and the mug with the broken handle and the pencils inside it. Everything in its place. Everything exactly as it had been the first time I walked into this workshop and stood here and understood that I had been given something real. I picked up the plane. I turned it over in my hands the way I had that morning. The tote was smooth at the grip, the wood warm even in the cold of the workshop. My grandfather's hand had been there for 30 years. The warmth was long gone but the shape of it remained, the particular worn place where his palm had rested, the slight polish of the wood where his fingers had curved. He had made chairs and tables and cabinets with this tool, things that were still in houses in Port Angeles that people sat in and ate from and kept documents inside, things that had outlasted the man who made them and would outlast the people who had them now. This was the thing he knew how to do. He did it with attention and precision and without needing it to be more than what it was. I set it back in the tray. I thought about what my mother had said when she was leaving. It's a good house. She had said it quietly, standing in the doorway looking back at the kitchen. It was the first thing she had said in the afternoon that sounded entirely true. Not strategic. Not composed. Just true. It was a good house. She knew it was a good house. She had known it for 40 years, since before I was born, since her husband's mother had kept it clean and dry and refused to let anything go unfixed for long. The knowing and the wanting were 2 different things. The wanting had made her reach for something that was not hers to reach for. The knowing was something she had always had, and it would be there when the wanting had passed. My grandmother had bought this lot in 1953 with my grandfather, and they had finished a half-built house and lived in it for 41 years and raised a son in it and kept a workshop in the back where a man made chairs and tables and a wooden box with a lid that fit precisely. She had kept that box on a shelf in the workshop and put the deed in it because she said a deed belonged to the place it described. She had signed a legal addendum 3 weeks before she died, with an attorney present, in her small upright handwriting, because she was a precise woman who did things the way she intended to do them. She had told me, in the kitchen of this house, on one of the 7 afternoons I had driven 4 hours round trip to sit with her, that she was not choosing me out of convenience. She was choosing me because she trusted me to understand what the house was. She said she thought I already did. Some things you hold on to not because they're useful but because they tell you what kind of person you're trying to be. I stayed in the workshop a while longer. Long enough for the afternoon light to shift and the gray to go a shade darker and the cold in the concrete floor to work up through my boots and settle in my ankles. I did not mind it. I had been cold in creek beds and on forested slopes and at culvert crossings on worse days than this, and the cold had been part of the work, part of the attention the work required. This felt like the same thing. The house, the workshop, the tools on the bench, these were mine to keep and maintain and pass on eventually in the same condition I received them, or better. That was what my grandmother had known I would understand. That was why she had chosen me and not the convenience. I locked the workshop and went back inside. If you've ever had to stand in a room and hold something that was yours, while someone you loved told you it belonged to everyone, share this with someone who needed to hear that being certain isn't the same as being cold. It isn't. Sometimes it's just what care looks like from the outside.